Dozens of elderly women in Dallas died in their sleep. No one suspected anything. No one investigated. Old people die. That's just how it goes. That was exactly what he counted on for years. But on the morning of March 19th, 2018, he forced his way into the apartment of a 91-year-old woman. She had no strength, no weapon, no one nearby. And she was the one who stopped him. This is a case where a serial killer was brought down not by police, not by forensic technology, but by a trembling hand raised from the edge of death. This story doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a missing wedding ring, and a horrifying truth that all of Dallas had been missing for years. Nobody in that store knew what was happening. Shoppers moved through the aisles, a cashier counted change, and an elderly woman pushed her car from aisle to aisle, completely unaware that someone was following her. She took her time. No rush, a shopping trip like any other in her life. But behind her, there was a man. He wasn't buying anything. He was just following. He tracked her through every aisle, kept a fixed distance, never took his eyes off her. When she reached the checkout line, he moved closer. When she walked to the parking lot, he followed. Then he got on his car and followed her out. She had no idea. She was probably thinking about dinner or a call she needed to make to her grandchildren. What she didn't know was that these were the last hours of her life. This man was no stranger passing through. He had done this before, many times, to many people just like her. And for years, no one suspected him. No one noticed. He moved in broad daylight, in plain sight of everyone around him. That was the most terrifying thing about this predator. He didn't hide in the dark. He didn't wear a disguise. He looked like a perfectly ordinary man doing perfectly ordinary things. And that was his perfect cover. To understand who he was, we have to go back to where all of this started. The upscale senior living communities of Dallas, Texas. The place where elderly people were supposed to be the safest. Now, these facilities were marketed like resort living. Safe, comfortable, peaceful. But something was quietly killing the people who lived inside of them. Picture what these places looked like. Clean hallways, manicured gardens, a fitness room, a chapel, a shared dining hall. This was where people came to enjoy their final years. Adult children placed their parents here because they believed they would be cared for, protected even. But between 2016 and 2018, in the Dallas area, a number of elderly women died. Most lived alone in private apartments. Most were in their 80s or older. Each death was ruled natural. They were old. Their hearts had stopped. Elderly people die. That's just a reality. No autopsies were ordered. No questions were asked. Case files quietly closed. But no one noticed a strange pattern. After each death, something went missing. A wedding ring, a gold necklace, a Rolex watch. At first, no one connected any of it. Each family just saw a loved one pass away, then a few missing items. They figured it was misplaced somewhere, or maybe a staff member had taken it. What detectives eventually discovered changed everything. The total value of the missing jewelry exceeded $500,000, and it always disappeared at the exact moment each victim died. That's the terrifying truth about these assumptions, because everyone took for granted that elderly people simply die. A killer had hidden himself perfectly inside that belief. It would take one extraordinary woman to break that silence. A woman who was supposed to be his next victim. Her name was Mary. Mary Bartell was 91 years old. She was about to become his next victim. She was also about to become his worst nightmare. Mary lived in an upscale senior community in Plano, just outside Dallas. A small, tidy apartment, family photos covering every wall. She and her husband had shared 67 years together, a love that started in high school. In the eyes of her children and grandchildren, it was the kind of love you only see in movies. Her husband passed away in 2015. Mary thought about him every day, but she refused to let herself fall apart. So every morning, She was up early. She went to church. She attended fitness classes. She made time for her friends. Her mind was sharp. She lived independently without needing anyone's help. She had no serious health conditions. So every day for Mary had a clear routine. The same wake-up time, the same friend who picked her up for exercise, and it was that routine, that simple daily habit, that would one day save her life. But there was one thing Mary never took off her hand. Her wedding ring. She wore it in the shower, she wore it to sleep. For decades, it had never left her finger. To Mary, that ring wasn't jewelry. It was 67 years. It was the man she had loved. It was everything that remained of a life well lived. On the morning of March 19th, 2018, someone knocked on Mary's door. And everything changed forever. Mary thought it was a friend. She unlocked the door, and that was the mistake that almost got her killed. It was a Monday morning like any other. Mary was sitting at her computer writing an email to her grandchildren. Sunlight came through the window, a quiet start to an ordinary day. Around 8:30, she heard a knock at the door. She didn't think twice. She assumed it was a friend or one of the familiar staff members from the building. So she walked over, unlocked the door. A motion she had made thousands of times before. But the moment the lock clicked open, a large man shoved the door hard and pushed his way in. Mary panicked. She tried to hold the door shut, but she was a 91-year-old woman, and he was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed well over 180 pounds. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. He was wearing green rubber gloves. People don't wear rubber gloves when they're visiting a friend. They wear them when they don't want to leave fingerprints. He forced Mary down. He tried to cut off her breathing. In a final, desperate moment, she reached for the emergency button she wore around her neck. But her arm was pinned. She couldn't reach it. And then Mary lost consciousness. That was his real weapon. Not physical strength, not a weapon, trust. He only needed to knock, and people opened the door themselves. He took Mary's jewelry and left. He assumed she was dead. But this time, he had made a mistake, and that mistake would end everything. On the gurney, everyone assumed Mary was dying. Then she opened her eyes and she pointed to her finger. That morning, a friend had come to pick Mary up for their usual exercise class, but Mary wasn't waiting by the door the way she always was. The door was slightly open, and that felt wrong. So the friend pushed it gently and stepped inside. What she saw stopped her cold. Mary was lying motionless on the floor. Her body was in a position that was completely wrong. She rushed over and called out to her. No response, so she called 911. Paramedics arrived, they checked Mary's pulse. The situation was critical. An officer called Mary's son, John Bartel. The family was in shock. None of them understood what had happened to her. Mary was in her 90s, but she was healthy, mentally sharp, with no serious medical conditions. How could this have happened? And then something no one expected. Right there, in front of the paramedics, Mary regained consciousness. She weakly raised her hand towards the officer standing nearby, and then she pointed to her bare finger. She needed them to understand something urgent. Her wedding ring was gone. The ring she had never once removed in decades. Not in the shower, not in bed. And now it wasn't there. To the Bartel family, that was the clearest possible signal. Mary would never take that ring off herself, which meant someone had broken in. This was not an accident. And for the first time, detectives had something they had never had before, a living witness. And she was about to help them uncover a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. A sergeant stopped cold. He realized he had heard about cases like this before. More than once. Far too many times. While searching for Mary's ring, detectives went through the apartment. What they found went beyond one missing piece of jewelry. Every item of value in the apartment was gone. A sergeant began connecting the dots. Over the past several years, he had come across similar reports. An elderly woman dies, jewelry goes missing. At the time, no one had linked any of it together. Each case was treated as isolated. An old person dies, a few items go missing, case closed. But now, with Mary's case, something was different. Because this time, the victim had survived to tell them what happened. So, detectives pulled old case files. The deeper they looked, the worse the picture became. Dozens of elderly women had died under nearly identical circumstances. Every one of them had valuable jewelry go missing. The total exceeded $500,000. A representative from one of the senior communities admitted something that made everyone in the room go quiet. In a normal year, only a handful of residents died, but there have been stretches where people were dying in clusters, just months apart, and the missing items were consistent every time. The alarm bells should have gone off long ago. Detectives determined that every single case could be linked back to just 4 upscale senior communities. They were now faced with the task of reviewing hundreds of unwitnessed deaths. One death is a tragedy. Hundreds of identical deaths is a pattern. The only question is whether anyone is willing to look directly at it. But before they could identify the killer, they needed to go back to 2 women, 2 close friends who had both died within weeks of each other. They were each other's closest friends. They ate lunch together every day. Then, both of them died, just weeks apart. Mary Brooks was 87 years old and lived at a senior community in Dallas. She had friends, a steady routine, a peaceful life. Family visited her often. She loved living there. Lunches with friends, long afternoons talking. It was exactly the kind of retirement she had always imagined. In early 2018, all of that ended. Mary Brooks was found dead in her apartment. Detectives quickly wrapped it up. Heart failure. She was 87, nothing suspicious. No autopsy, no deeper investigation. The case file was closed. But her family felt something was off. She had been found lying perfectly straight, as if someone had positioned her that way. There were bruises on her arms, small details that didn't line up with a natural death. All of it was ignored. What came out at trial later was the detail that made everyone go cold. Her grandson testified that he was the one who found her body on January 31st, 2018, and a receipt placed her at Walmart the day before. The same Walmart, and security footage showed a car leaving right behind hers, heading in the same direction. That car would come up again and again throughout this story. Families began to speak out. They demanded answers. What they got was silence, cold and deliberate. A daughter asked police one simple question: did someone hurt my mother? The answer she received will make you angry. Families pushed. They went to the management of the senior communities. They asked about the missing jewelry. The more they asked, the more dismissive responses became. One manager told them that elderly women sometimes hid things in their underwear drawers, as if this was simply a matter of old women being forgetful, as if nothing warranted further concern. A daughter went directly to the police. She asked whether someone could have harmed her mother. Officers told her the death was from natural causes, and that someone had simply happened to come and take the jewelry from her body afterward. A response so cold it barely made sense. Left with no other option, residents started trying to protect themselves. They put up warning flyers about the thefts. They reminded each other to keep their doors locked. Management pulled every flyer down. They said the notices hadn't been approved. They were causing unnecessary anxiety among the residents. In other words, management chose the appearance of calm over the actual safety of the people living there. When the police reviewed the security camera systems, they found a massive gap. Very few cameras were installed. In one facility, the 3rd and 4th floors had no cameras at all. That meant most of the entry and exit points were completely unwatched. An outsider could walk in, do whatever he came to do, and then leave without leaving a trace. Sometimes evil doesn't come from one person. It comes from everyone who decided to look away. It wasn't until Mary Bartell survived that the real investigation finally began, and the name finally surfaced. Sometimes he was a nurse, sometimes a plumber, sometimes a maintenance worker. No one ever knew which face was real. Working from Mary's detailed description, detectives began canvassing. They tracked down every witness, every incident report filed at any of the senior communities. And they found something worth noting. Multiple people had seen a suspicious man lingering around the buildings. He told them he was there to check a pipe for leaks. He was around 6 feet tall, over 180 pounds, well-dressed, always carrying a shoulder bag. On the same day Mary was attacked, a resident had called police to report something odd. A man they didn't recognize had been sitting in a car in the parking lot of the senior facility for hours. It struck them as strange, so they wrote down the license plate. When detectives ran that plate, they got a name. Billy Chemirmir, 46 years old, a Kenyan national living in the United States illegally. Reviewing security footage, detectives pieced together exactly how he operated. Sometimes he wore scrubs, sometimes a plumber's uniform, sometimes a maintenance worker's vest. He used uniforms from old jobs. Combined with the facility's camera blind spots, it gave him access to elderly residents without anyone looking twice. But the most chilling detail was buried in his prior criminal record. In 2016, Billy had been arrested for impersonating a maintenance worker to gain entry to a senior living facility. He had also worked as an in-home caregiver for elderly clients. He knew exactly how to approach them. He knew they lived alone. He knew they trusted easily. He knew they were physically vulnerable. An opportunistic predator doesn't need a perfect plan. He needs a uniform, a convincing smile, and a system full of gaps to slip through. Detectives had a name, but there was something they didn't know yet. He had killed again, just hours earlier. Detectives were quietly following his car. He stopped, dropped something in the trash can, and kept moving. What was inside that trash can would expose everything. March 20, 2018. One day after the attack on Mary, detectives had been surveilling the car flagged the previous day. The car pulled into an apartment complex, slowed near a dumpster. Billy got out, dropped something inside. Some detectives stayed on him, others moved to check the dumpster. What they found stopped them cold. Inside was a small, red jewelry box. It had been pried open. A few items of value were still inside, but more importantly, there was paperwork with a name on it. Lou T. Harris. Detectives ran the name immediately. A Vietnamese-American woman, 81 years old, living less than 2 miles away. Everything became a race against time. They needed to get to that apartment now. When they arrived, a neighbor stopped them. "She's fine," the neighbor said. "I just saw her at the post office at 4:30 this afternoon." She was wrong. Detectives forced the door. They were too late. Lou T. Harris was found dead inside her apartment. Billy had killed her less than an hour before his arrest. Sometimes, justice arrives too late for one person. But that final victim, her name, her jewelry box, became the piece of evidence that closed the case entirely. The box in the dumpster was the direct link between Billy and a confirmed homicide. He was taken into custody outside the complex, and inside his home, detectives found everything that proved exactly who he was. He was charged with killing 22 elderly women. It took 2 trials to make sure he never walked free again. And the way this story ended was as violent as the crimes he committed. Inside Billy's apartment, detectives found multiple cell phones, latex gloves, and a fake passport already printed with an alternate identity. He had prepared an escape route. He knew this day might come. In his car and in his home, they found jewelry belonging to previous victims, along with evidence connecting him to dozens of other suspicious deaths. Billy had been selling the jewelry through pawn shops, jewelry stores, and eBay. He was believed to have made over $100,000 from the possessions of the women he killed. One shop owner remembered him clearly. He was a regular. Every time he came in, he was cheerful, shaking hands, making conversation, as comfortable as any legitimate seller. He did this routinely, confidently, as if it were simply his job. Billy Chemirmir was charged with killing 22 elderly women across Dallas and Collin counties between 2016 and 2018. His method was suffocation with a pillow. The American press called it the pillowcase murders. The first trial for the murder of Luty Harris in 2021 ended in a hung jury. But prosecutors didn't stop. In 2022, Billy was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder for Luty Harris and for Mary Brooks, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 sentences. He would die behind bars. Then, in September 2023, something no one had predicted. Billy was killed by a fellow inmate inside his own cell. The man who had spent years hunting the most vulnerable people he could find died violently, the same way he had made others die. But through it all, don't forget the person who started the chain of events that ended here, a 91-year-old woman named Mary Bartell. No strength, no weapon, only clarity and courage. And she was the one who stopped one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. The question that still lingers: if Mary hadn't survived that morning, how many more would he have killed? And how many families would never have learned the truth? If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below with your thoughts. And if you think it's worth watching, leave a like, subscribe, and helps more people find stories like this one.